Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silvermon, and this video will be talking about the recent alpha demo of Nioh on PlayStation 4. An action RPG heavily inspired by Dark Souls, Nioh comes out later this year, and I believe it's exclusive to PS4. The easiest way to sum up Nioh would be Japanese Dark Souls, or Dark Souls in a Japanese setting. The main character in Nioh seems to be inspired or based on William Adams, the first Western samurai, and I believe the first Englishman to live in Japan. But obviously there's a lot of fictional elements here, as the game has you fighting demons and monsters, Japanese yokai and oni. In that sense you could say the game is somewhat similar to Onimusha. In fact, if you take Ninja Gaiden, Onimusha and Dark Souls and toss them into a blender, you'd probably end up with something very close to Nioh. From a basic gameplay perspective, it is Dark Souls. You move through areas or levels and you have checkpoints that respawn enemies. You level up stats that are almost functionally identical to Dark Souls, and you obtain weapons that scale with those stats in a similar fashion. You'll unlock shortcuts and fight hard enemies, and the level will end with a climactic battle against a fearsome boss. But is Nioh just an uninspired Souls clone like, say, Lords of the Fallen? No, I feel like, although it is definitely a Souls clone, it actually tries to build upon the foundation that Souls offers, instead of just trying to offer you more Dark Souls. On that note, as Nioh does a lot of things almost identically to Dark Souls, how about we talk about some of the things that it does different to Dark Souls? Starting with skills. When you level up your stats in Nioh, you will also obtain skill points that can be used to purchase several skills, such as parrying, new attacks, combo enders, combo finishers, however you want to call them, or simply buffs to your attacks or defense, or, things like that. Such as do more damage to enemies whilst in high stance. This also extends to the game's magic systems, which I'll go into shortly. In general, the skill system isn't that amazing, it's nothing new or exciting, as it's essentially a way to gate off certain abilities that you might want and will end up getting. But is it bad? No. Is it great? Not really, it's a fairly standard skill system that has been in 100,000 other games. It's just one of those things that games have because it's very video gamey, and it's a way to let you feel as if your character is progressing as you unlock more and more abilities that enhance your character's strength. Stances, however, are a really, really nice addition. If you've played Jedi Outcast or Jedi Academy, you'll know what to expect from these. I'm sure there are other games that have used stance systems, but I was immediately reminded of those two, and I associate it with those two. In essence, your character has 3 stances: high stance, mid stance, and low stance. In high stance, William, or Ken Summer as some have affectionately named him, will do more damage but also consume more ki, this game's version of stamina effectively, and also be less mobile. Low stance, as you might expect, is the exact opposite of this. In low stance you move fast, attack fast, and consume little ki, but you also do little damage. But evading in low stance also allows you to ki pulse, which is again a mechanic I'll get into shortly. Finally we have mid stance, which is effectively a balance between high and low, and seems to be more a reactionary stance, by which I mean it appears to be the best stance for blocking and parrying. To put it in Dark Souls terms, high stance would be like using an ultra great weapon, low stance would be like using daggers and rolls, and mid stance would be your standard block parry methods. I really like the stance system. In fact, I like it so much that I wish it was in Dark Souls instead of the weapon arts mechanic, because I think it's really damn good. Not only does it change the basic methodology behind your attacks, but it also changes your attacks themselves, effectively meaning that each weapon has 3 different sets of attacks, one for each stance. Swapping between stances is near instant and heavily encouraged by the game. For example, my current go-to tactic is to remain in low stance whilst approaching an enemy, wait for them to attack, at which point I can do a speedy dodge to put myself in a favourable position, swap to high stance to deliver a powerful blow, and then back to low stance to dodge away again. But I know that Doug, for example, seems to favour mid stance and parries, and it really gives you a lot of options, and that's nice. All three stances are very good in their own ways. Next up we have the ki system. As mentioned, it is basically stamina from Dark Souls. You consume ki when you attack, block an attack, dodge or sprint, and it recovers extremely quickly. Nioh goes into some depth with managing your ki, however. As mentioned, different stances will consume different amounts of ki. Not only that, but there are also ways to further manage your ki. For example, when you perform an action, it is possible to enhance the recovery of your ki by hitting the stance button at the right time. You can essentially compare this to another mechanic in a game series I've played the crap out of, Gears of War and its active reload system. Furthermore, if you hit the stance button at just the right time, you will initiate a ki pulse, which can be used to cleanse certain demonic auras that many enemies will leave behind. In low stance you can even ki pulse using a well-timed dodge, which is not only cool, it's really damn useful. Beyond that we have the item system that Nioh uses. It is almost Diablo-esque in that enemies will drop a ton of weapons and armour, colour-coded by rarity. I'm not sure if I like that or not yet, but my first reaction isn't negative to it. I am a little concerned with the durability and item storage systems that the game uses though, which has a number of knock-on side effects. Weapons and armour degrade very quickly in Nioh, and the only way, at least in the alpha, to repair them is by either using a whetstone to repair weapons or glue for your armour. The problem is, you can only carry 9 of these items, and they are drops from enemies. I don't think that's a very good system, but at the very least it could be greatly improved by introducing an item storage system akin to Bloodborne or Dark Souls 3. What I mean by this is fairly simple. If you have 9 whetstones, you can't pick up any more whetstones. How I think it should work is that if you have 9 whetstones and you pick up another whetstone, it should go into your item storage box at your shrine, and be automatically added to your inventory next time you hit a checkpoint and don't have 9 whetstones. I don't really understand why that isn't the case, as it presents a lot of tedious problems, such as the healing item problem. Healing in Nioh is a very bizarre system. It is almost like a mix between Bloodborne's Blood Vials and Dark Souls' Estus system, only it combines the worst aspects of each. I believe you will always spawn with 3 healing elixirs, and more can drop from enemies, up to a maximum of 10 that you can carry at once. But again, once they are gone, and once you reach 10 you can't pick up any more. You can obtain them by selling items at your checkpoint, bonfire, shrines, however you want to call it, as there's seemingly a random chance to obtain them or other similar items when you sell items to the shrine, when you offer items up. The solution here would be to simply let you store excess elixirs in your item storage. By all means, don't let us carry more than 10 with us, but let us put excess elixirs into our shrine so that we don't have to farm them or whatever. I'm really hoping that the final game has a more elegant solution, as at the moment this is the make or break thing for the game, for me personally. And again, personally, I feel the Estus system in Dark Souls is close to perfect. Does anybody really enjoy farming healing items? Because Nioh in its current state is going to have a lot of that. Every time you die to a boss and use your healing items, you're gonna have to farm more healing items if you want to fight the boss with as many as you can hold, and let's face it, the bosses are no pushover. If you want to have a reasonable chance against them, you're probably going to want to walk in there with as many healing items as you can hold. It gives me flashbacks to the most horrible parts of gaming in the 90s, of playing Mega Man or Metroid and having to go back to areas and farm up your energy tanks and stuff before you fight a boss. I don't like that. Maybe some people like that and they want this old school stuff back, but I don't, and I don't think it's a good thing, a healthy thing for the game. As for weapon variety, in the alpha at least there are only swords, axes and spears. When it comes to melee weapons anyway, but I expect there'll be more in the final game. Axes also get hammers, which count as the same weapon class, and I have to point out that spears are amazing in Nioh. I'm a huge fan of using spears as weapons, but they are so rarely satisfying to use. They are just kind of boring in so many games. Nioh might have some of the best spear combat in any game I've played, and having just finished recording my Dark Souls 3 Let's Play, where I almost exclusively used spears, and was frequently frustrated by them, it was a big contrast. What other weapons will we get in the final product, though? I'm not sure. I'm sure there will be more than in the alpha, but even if there's just those three, I won't mind too much. Personally, I would love to see some flails. I think something like the Kusarigama chain sickle from Ninja Gaiden could fit in quite well here. We also have a bow in the alpha. That is the only ranged weapon we have, and it takes up its own slot, so it's pretty damn useful and important. Whether or not we get something like crossbows or muskets in the final product is up for debate. I would strongly expect to see something like that though. You can kill enemies in one hit with a headshot, which is not only useful but kinda satisfying to watch their heads fly off. Outside of these, however, you also get Dark Souls style consumable items akin to, well, throwing knives, throwing firebombs and things like that. But more interesting is the magic system. You have both a Ninpo and Jutsus in Nioh, basically items and spells. And what I like about them is they can be used with very low stat investment. In fact, I didn't put a single point into the magic stats and I could use some magic, which I thought was really cool. Will you be able to create a 100% magic sorcerer who only uses magic spells? I'm thinking that's not the case, but you can get some pretty useful stuff. In the alpha, I heavily found myself using the Fire Shuriken Ninpo and the Jutsu, the magic spell that slows down enemies. Because it doesn't just work on normal enemies, it also works on bosses, and imagine if you could make bosses in Dark Souls move at like almost half speed. That's essentially what this is, and it's really damn useful. It works in a very similar fashion to Dark Souls. You buy the item or spell with a skill point, and then you need to equip it, or prepare it at a checkpoint shrine, and it will take up what is effectively an attunement slot, and you can make more of these attunement slots by putting in points into the appropriate skill. I believe it's dexterity for ninja items, and magic for, magic, and then you equip them onto the quick use item slots. That's a problem though, there isn't enough of those. You have up on the D-pad, which is for your healing items, left on the D-pad, which is for swapping weapons, down and right are the only two slots left for actually equipping, quick items. That just isn't enough. We need more. We need a way to cycle through them, like in Dark Souls, or a way to have modifiers, like holding down L2 lets you access, a different set of D-pad options, and stuff like that. Because I frequently found myself wanting to swap out firebombs and fire shurikens, because, as mentioned, you can only carry like 10 items, and at that point it's like, oh, this enemy dropped a firebomb, but I already have 10 firebombs. I better swap to firebombs so I can use them for a bit, and then swap back to fire shurikens, and it's fiddly and stupid, and we just need a way to have lots more items equipped at the same time, because no one likes having to pause the game. Not that you can pause the game, but no one likes having to bring up the inventory and swap things out every few seconds. The inventory management in general can be a little clunky, but it's far from terrible, and it has lots of ways to sort your items, though I would also really like it if they let you look at individual subcategories. For example, if you look at your weapons, you're looking at all your weapons. I would like a way just to look at all the spears, because I'm holding like 20 spears and I want to sell some of the crappy ones, That would be really nice. The last major thing in Nioh would be the Guardian Spirits. And this goes back to what I said right at the start of the video. Nioh attempts to build on the foundation of Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, when you die, you leave a bloodstain which contains all of your souls. Lords of the Fallen copied this mechanic for no reason. There was no explanation in the entire game for why this happens. It's just there because Dark Souls did it. In Nioh, however, you have a guardian spirit that accompanies your character, and these are based on, I assume, traditional Japanese spirits. There's a fire dog, a lightning dog, a goshawk looking thing, and a goddamn shark. And when your character dies, you will leave a sword mound, or something along those lines, which your guardian spirit will, well, guard for you. It is effectively guarding your spirit at that point, and you can go and reclaim your souls, or Amrita in this case. But there's a downside to this. When guarding your souls, your guardian is obviously not with you, and this can be dangerous because the other function of your guardian spirit is the living weapon mechanic. Effectively, this is a super meter, and when filled up, you can unleash your guardian spirit in a flashy super attack, which powers up your character immensely for some time. However, if you want to reclaim your guardian spirit without going back to your body, you can recall it at the shrine, any shrine, although you'll lose your souls that it was guarding. So, you know, it's a risk-reward thing. If your souls have been dropped in a dangerous area, do you want to risk going back there without having the living weapon at your disposal? Speaking of sword mounds, they also combine with the bloodstains of other players that you'll find in Dark Souls. Whereas in Dark Souls interacting with them would show you a replay of how that player died, in Nioh it will instead tell you how that player died. Like, it will say, this character drowned or was hacked to death by outlaws or something like that, you know? And if you interact with it, it will summon a revenant of that player, effectively an AI-controlled ghost of that player's avatar, which you can duel to the death, and upon defeating them they might drop one of the items that character was using too. It's a pretty nifty mechanic in my opinion, because I think you could probably get some really good items that way. Like, if you're stuck in an area, and there's loads of player revenants, you could just summon them and fight them and kill them and maybe get a good item from it. I think that's really cool. There's also gold revenants, which are left behind by the developers and represent actual characters, and they're unique, and usually they have a chance to drop something more useful or unique or cool or whatever. Usually it's very obvious which ones are developer revenants, because they'll be called something Japanese and lore friendly, as opposed to like XXX MLG Master 420 XXX, you know? But I know what you're thinking. PvP, summons, co-op invasions. Well, I don't know about PvP, but you can summon other players in Nioh. It's a little convoluted though. The game, effectively, as of the alpha, maintains every level as its own contained map. It's not like in Dark Souls where you'll go from Tomb of the Giants and you can run all the way up to, like, Sen's Fortress without loading screen, you know? It's not like that. Each level is self-contained, and you access them from a level select screen. And at that level select screen, you are able to matchmake. Effectively, you go to a level, you press matchmake, and it will look for someone who is summoning, and dump you in with them. It's effectively like putting down your summon sign, I suppose, but people have no way of choosing who they summon. And then, as a player in their own world, you have to be in a level, and you go to a shrine and you offer up a cup, and it will summon somebody at random. It's a little janky at the moment, but hopefully the final game will improve it. I have no idea if there's going to be PvP or invasions, but that's not a big deal to me personally. I would like them to have a password system though, so you can actually summon friends. I don't really see the point in making it really hard to play with your friends. Just give us a password system, let it scale down our stats if we're too high level or whatever, but let us play with friends, because that's what we want to do, we want to play with our friends, you know? Oh, another function of the shrine would be blessings. Effectively, you can gather little dryad-like green spirit men back to your shrine, known as Kodama, and they will grant Ken Summer blessings, such as increased souls obtained, higher weapon or armor drops, or, the one that I was using because it seems like the best one, increased healing item drops. Like, more healing items will drop, and so forth. All in all, Nioh has a pretty interesting setting, in my opinion. Dark Souls is extremely Western themed, even if it is made by Japanese developers, so it's kinda cool to see something more Eastern themed. Personally, I prefer Western fantasy, but we've had so much of that lately with Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and the horrible Lords of the Fallen clone, that I'm happy to see something new, and that I've not seen before, and it's really fascinating to me to have something that is different. I wonder if we'll ever be getting Egyptian or Aztec themed Souls one day. I mean, who knows? We've had medieval fantasy, we've had Victorian horror with Bloodborne, and now Tokugawa period Japan. Well, maybe we're going to be getting sci-fi Souls next. Who knows? I also want to briefly mention two of the interesting options the game has. You can set the game mode to either action or movie. Movie mode basically puts the game at 1080p resolution and 30 frames per second, and makes it look a little nicer. Whereas action mode sets it to 720p 60fps, and downgrades the visuals some. So you're basically going for visuals or frame rate. I've only played in action mode because I personally take frame rate over visual fidelity any day. But I think that's a really nice option. I mean, if I was doing like a lore video for Nioh, for example, then I might want to use movie mode, just to have, you know, a more cinematic and nice looking visuals, whereas if I'm doing actual gameplay, I definitely want the frame rate. Obviously, 1080p 60fps would be better still, but I mean, what you gonna do? And then there's the camera mode, which you can set to action or classic. I don't really know all the differences, but classic mode is a million times better when it comes to lock-ins, so definitely go with classic. And there's one thing I've not really touched on, which you might be wondering why haven't I touched on it, as I wanted to leave it until last. The difficulty. I've been reading a lot of threads on forums and other YouTube videos, as well as on my own videos, about the difficulty of Nioh, and I just want to throw my opinion out there. For the most part, I feel the difficulty of Nioh isn't too bad or too extreme. People are complaining that the game gives you impossible groups of enemies, that you have to fight groups of enemies, but that's because the game doesn't want you or expect you to fight groups of enemies. People are saying like, oh, you have to fight 3 enemies at a time, but that's not the case. Every time in the alpha there are a group of enemies, you are able to either pull them one at a time or thin them out before they reach melee range. And I think that is what the game expects you to do. That is why the game gives you an arrow, a bow and arrow, you know, dedicated button. That is why the game gives you things like firebombs. Firebombs in Dark Souls are nice, but you very rarely actually need them, you know? In Nioh, they can be almost essential, almost crucial. When you are presented with 2 or 3 enemies standing in a group, the game doesn't want you to run up to them and like whack them all at the same time. The game wants you to pick them off one at a time. It wants you to headshot one of them or throw a firebomb into the middle of them and set them all on fire, and it gives you ample means to do so. Arrows, firebomb, magic, and so forth. Every enemy in Nioh is pretty damn dangerous if you give them the chance to be. I don't mind that. I think that's kinda nice. It's almost like how Dark Souls was at release. Back at the beginning, back during Demon Souls, even single enemies could be really terrifying. These days they aren't, because we've been playing Souls games for like 5 years plus, so at this point we're generally happy to run in and take out a bunch of hollows at the same time. But you can't do that at Nioh, not at the moment anyway. Maybe by the time we get to Nioh Part 3, Ken Summer's Revenge, maybe at that point yes, but at the moment, you can't play this like Dark Souls. You have to play it how Nioh wants you to play it, which is carefully. What I do mind is the weird healing item system, as mentioned earlier. I don't mind if a boss is really hard, honestly, I don't. I do mind if you force me to farm healing items every single damn time I want to fight the boss. That is stupid, that is boring, that will result in people just giving up. From my experience, if you give people unlimited tries at fighting a boss, if you put a bonfire right next to a boss and let that player have 10, 15, 20 Estus every time, they will generally beat it eventually. But if you punish them, if you make someone farm 20 Estus every single time they want to fight the 4 kings, they're not going to do that. Eventually, a lot of players will just give up because they can't be bothered. It's not the boss that is killing their motivation. It's the fact that they have to farm every time when they fight that boss. No one likes doing that. Okay, I'm sure there are people who like doing that. For the most part, people don't like that. If you punish them, if you force them to farm healing items between every attempt, they will just go and play something else. I also don't think it's a good idea that enemies will try and chase you through the entire level. Not only is this dumb when you've beaten an area and want to skim through it, it's a very basic gameplay design flaw. Why? Because there will always be ways to exploit that to your advantage. What if the enemies can't climb ladders or fit through doors? Well, doesn't matter because you can pull them back to the beginning of the level where there's a door or a ladder. Then you can cheese the hell out of them. That's one of the reasons enemies in Dark Souls will leash back to their spawn point. Because otherwise you can just pull them to an area that, you know, is advantageous for you and cheese them. And there's still a lot of enemies you can do that to. Just off the top of my head, the Aldrich Spider Cursed thing in the Cathedral of the Deep. It spawns right next to a door it can't fit through. Maybe that one is intentional, but if you let enemies follow you through an entire level, that's dumb because it means you can cheese the head out of them. Finally, I just think from the alpha, the areas could be a little more forgiving with shortcuts. Perhaps. I'm not 100% on that. I think maybe they could give us some more shortcuts. Like the area with all the fire. Yeah, use the fire to block us the first time through, but once we get past the fire, I don't know, can't you put like a bucket of water on the other side of the fire and let us extinguish the fire so we can use it as a shortcut? That's what it looks like it's there for, but it's actually just there to permanently slow us down getting through the level. I don't know. I'm not 100% on that, but I think if you're going to put fire there to block us going through the area, once we actually get behind the fire, let us extinguish the flames, so that in future we can get through the area faster. Just saying. For the most part, I think it's fine to try and offer a really challenging game. You just also have to be fair. Nioh didn't have too many moments that I found were outright unfair or cheap, like the floor suddenly collapsing without any warning that it would do so, or something like that. But there were moments that made me swear quite a lot. It's a very delicate balance when it comes to making a game challenging yet fair. I think Nioh can strike it. Does the alpha? No, but it comes very close. They just need to fine-tune and balance things for the final release. But I think this game has a lot of potential. I'm almost certainly going to pick it up at launch. Hell, I might even do a playthrough on the channel if that's something you guys would like to see and something that I think would be fun for me to do. But to sum it all up, Nioh is a lot of fun so far. It is a Souls clone, no doubt about it. But they're trying to build upon Souls instead of just copying it. And I'm perfectly alright with that, personally. Until next time though, you guys take care.